Welcome back. Welcome back to another Stadium Seat Sports podcast recording. As always, I'm Coop here with my partner and co-host Kriv. And in this preview, we're going to be talking about number 7 Alabama taking on number 11 Tennessee in Knoxville. Just going to be an absolutely electric environment there in Knoxville. Always a great game between these two programs, even though Alabama has, recently really dominated this series. This one, has been really difficult for me to kind of pin down and figure out what I'm going to take here, Kriv. And I think, after, I give you my thoughts and you give me yours, I think you're probably going to share the same sentiment, but I'll be interested to see your thoughts as well. But, coming out of that Georgia game where Alabama jumped to a 28-0 lead, and then obviously Georgia stormed back because Georgia's a great team, in their own right. But ultimately, Alabama ended up winning that game. I felt really, really good about Alabama. I was like, wow, they took down, what has been the kingpin, relatively speaking, of the SEC over the last several years, even though Alabama beat them in the SEC championship last year. Kirby Smart has had that program running like a well-oiled machine. I felt really good about Alabama, and then they have just one of the biggest upsets in recent memory, losing to Vanderbilt. And then last week, Alabama, so in the game against Vanderbilt, their defense looked quite suspect. And then even last week when they were, sitting there and they're taking on South Carolina, they clawed their way out to a 27-25 victory. And I felt really very like it was a very lackluster performance from this Alabama team. I think very highly of Jalen Milroe. I think DeBoer is a very good coach in his own right, but like ever since that Georgia game where Alabama looked to be like, man, maybe they're the best team in the country, has really fallen short with that loss to Vanderbilt and then looking very subpar against South Carolina this past week. And then the same thing with Tennessee is why I'm having such a difficult time picking this game, is because Tennessee started the year looking really, really good. Then they took that tough loss to Arkansas and then had to kind of claw out a win against a not very good Florida Gators team. And I think like what we've come to expect from a Josh Heupel-led team with Nico Iamaleava at quarterback is like a very good, well-oiled machine, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And their defense has been really, really solid this year as well. And Tennessee has just looked very pedestrian on offense in these past 2 weeks. And so it's like, had Tennessee's defense been struggling over the past 2 weeks, but their offense was in rhythm, I would take Tennessee easily in this game because Alabama's defense has been struggling. But it's like the two units, Alabama's defense and Tennessee's offense, have both been struggling over the last few weeks. And I'm like, which one gets back on track in this game? And I'm tending to lean towards Alabama in this game. And I'll tell you just like the one sole reason that it is that way for me is strictly because of Jalen Milroe, excuse me. I think the world of Nico Iamaleava. I think he's fantastic. I think he's an incredibly talented quarterback, but he's very young. He's very inexperienced. Milroe has the experience as a collegiate quarterback. And yes, he sometimes makes errant throws and costly turnovers, but I will take the experience at quarterback, even though it's in Knoxville. I'm going to take the experience at quarterback in Milroe. And I expect Alabama's defense and DeBoer to have this team ready to play. I will take Alabama in this game. Very, very close. But I would not be surprised to see it go either way because Bama's defense has been down. Tennessee's offense has been down over the last few weeks. I expect Bama. I'm taking them purely based on the fact that they have a more experienced quarterback who I think has seen these types of situations before. That's really what it boiled down to for me.
Yeah, and I do think Milroe is the X factor for this game. And with that being said, though, we have seen the different sides to Jalen Milroe, and the first side being the guy who played against Georgia a few weeks ago. I mean, he put himself on the map. He skyrocketed up Heisman odds. People started to take note that, hey, maybe he corrected some of those deficiencies and knocks on him. Like, he was just making play after play. I mean, it was very impressive. And then the very next week, you see him just, I don't know. It was not very impressive against Vanderbilt. He missed throws. He had throws that left you scratching your head. He was limited, even kind of trying to make plays on the ground, which is something that I would say it would seem hard to take away from him, but Vanderbilt was able to do so. And then, of course, last week, another game kind of similar to that. He kind of just let Alabama down in a sense. I mean, he left something to be desired. So really, it just depends on what Jalen Milroe shows up. And Tennessee's defense is the one thing that has been traveling well. Now, you mentioned how Alabama and their offense and how their defense has struggled. Tennessee's polar opposite, just like you said.
Yep.
And it's very out of character for Tennessee to have a struggling offense. But I think this is a good matchup for Nico and the rest of the offense there to try to get going. Sampson has been an absolute stud for Tennessee. I mean, the guy has 15 rushing touchdowns already. That's an absurd amount at this point in the season. And he has been the sole offensive weapon, really, that has just kept them going. But, I mean, you look at their offense and their last few games, I mean, Oklahoma does have a decent defense, but they only scored 25. In that loss to Arkansas, they scored 14. And then, as you mentioned, that game against Florida, which I don't think anyone thought was going to be this close, they only scored 23, and that was an overtime game.
Right.
But, I mean, Alabama just – I don't know what's wrong with that defense. I'd seen what Vanderbilt did, and then the very next week, I mean, Lenora Sellers has shown flashes, but he still played pretty poorly, and South Carolina still found a way to put points on the board against this Alabama team. So personally, I don't know what to expect with Milroe going into Knoxville, having to go up against a good Tennessee defense. I do think Alabama's defense has something wrong with it inherently. And despite what Nico has struggled, I think Sampson's going to be the guy who kind of breaks things open, but I think Nico's going to make some plays against the defense and kind of get things back on track here. And that's why I'm actually taking Tennessee to pull this one out.
I like that we're going opposite here. And I'm just going to leave, this conversation and kind of end this video with these kind of 3 micro points here. It will play significantly into Tennessee's favor being at home. Like, Neyland Stadium is one of the most electric atmospheres in all of college football, and that is not easy to go into, even if you are an experienced quarterback and team. So that is an advantage for the Tennessee Volunteers, for sure. And maybe I'm giving a little too much credit and stock to Kalen DeBoer, who I think is very, very solid as a head coach, and kind of thinking like, it's just Nick Saban's Alabama walking into Neyland Stadium. It's not. It's Kalen DeBoer's Alabama. And though I think the world of Kalen DeBoer, maybe I'm giving him a little too much credit to what I would kind of give to what were Nick Saban-led Alabama teams here. So, I think that could potentially, be an interesting, kind of point to watch. But I also wonder if there's just a little bit of like a factor for Tennessee where it's like, you have been dominated in this series as of recently. So does that get in your head a little bit? I'm not saying that it will. I think Josh Heupel will have this team ready to play, but you kind of question that, because Alabama really has dominated this series over the last, decade or so. Like, it's really been one-sided, this rivalry. So I'm really interested to see that.
I will say, I mean, just a few years ago, in one of the best games we've seen in recent memory, I mean, when Tennessee upset Alabama that year with Hendon Hooker, I mean, that stadium, that crowd, those fans, it was explosive. And that was a Nick Saban-led team, as you mentioned. And this is a big challenge for Kalen DeBoer. He has not had to do something like this to this point. Obviously, beating Georgia at home was a huge win for them. But going on the road into Neyland, I mean, that is one of the hardest places to play. And that's why I continue to say Jalen Milroe is that X factor. He has the experience, and he's the kind of guy who can silence a crowd, but he's also the kind of guy who has been a little Jekyll and Hyde, and you don't know which one you're getting when he shows up.
True. And listen, before we close this out, like, this is an absolutely massive game for Alabama and Kalen DeBoer because they had that incredible win over Georgia. And you would say, like, how could you possibly be like maybe potentially questioning Kalen DeBoer? But if there's one thing that the Alabama fan base is not, it's patient because they are used to having such high success, not even just with Nick Saban, but just historically that program has had an incredible amount of success. And so you've already lost to Vanderbilt, which is a big strike in the eyes of a lot of, national pundits, but especially Alabama fans.
I'll say this. Vanderbilt looked like a bad loss. I don't think they are anymore. They've looked very good, and they've beat some quality opponents.
Sure. But this is a big one because if you now go into Tennessee and you lose, Alabama's sitting there at 5-2, and then you're kind of starting to question, like, are we on the outside looking in for the 12-team playoff here? And so Alabama fans expect a lot, and they should. Their program historically has been phenomenal. So there's some pressure on Alabama and Kalen DeBoer going into this game, as there always is week in and week out with these top-tier programs. But that's something to watch. And guys, as always, if you tuned in here for this preview, really appreciate you guys. Drop a like, drop a subscription, drop your comments down in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts on this game, and we'll see you guys in the next one.